Thank you so much for staying with us. As we promised you, a full bumper pack show today, and we have been living up to that. So we get into our very next conversation. How well do you know your African history, and where are you learning your stories from? The need for African creatives to speak our truth in their own words and with the right narratives cannot be overemphasized. Now, particularly now when the global media is rife with either an altered or a skewed narrative of who we are as Africans. Now, one author that is retelling our African story, and in this context, the history of Nigeria's post-independence era, is Diekoye Oyeyinka. His book, Stillborn, is a clever, witty, and creative recounting of events that happened in Nigeria between 1960 all the way to 2010 through fictional characters. And he is in the studio with me this morning. Welcome to the show, Koye. It's good to have you here.
Thank you so much.
All right, so you didn't start off as an author. It's not that you read literature, you did fine arts or creative writing. You actually were in the process of getting a degree in economics, or you had gotten a degree in economics to a master's in urbanization, and now writing a successful book called Stillborn. Mm-hmm. So how did that transition work? Where's the trajectory there?
Thank you for introducing me. Thank you for having me on the show. My background was economics, and then my master's was in urbanization and development. In between doing both, I was working with the UN, and I was staying with this woman who had a very vast collection of African literature. And just reading through it, I felt there were some gaps that needed to be addressed. And so I decided to give it a go. And that was how Stillborn was born.
So why this era of time? And you actually go from 1960 to about 2010, and that's a really wide area. That takes about 3 or 4 generations thereabouts. So there's a continuation of the story. And of course, it's interesting to know that you want to take it that far. So you're following two main figures, Sheung and his friend there, and you follow them throughout so many things, but also their family members. So why this period of time, and why for so long?
So I wanted to have a snapshot of what Nigeria had been like since independence. So we started in 1950, we go to 2010, and the idea was anyone who reads this book should have a pretty concise view of what has happened in Nigeria. The idea was I touch on all the major events that have happened. So even if you don't know anything about Nigeria, by reading the book and having your Google next to you, you should pretty much...
You can cross-check.
Exactly. You should pretty much have a very broad view of what we've been through. And I wrote it because this was, 2010 was when we were in that political
space,
Jonathan had convinced everyone to come back home right before Yar'Adua had died in office.
And we're doing the doctrine of necessity.
Exactly. So the whole idea was we need to... I didn't learn any of these things in school, and I was like, I want to create an accessible form for younger people to see the history of the nation and to understand what has happened, so they can make informed decisions. At that point, the two people that were running for office were people we had seen before. It was Buhari and someone else. And I'm just like, you guys have been here,
you're part and parcel in some parts of the problem of why we're here.
Exactly. So I wanted people to just remember that, because I was having all sorts of discussions with people, and they'll be like, it's either this guy or that guy. I'm like, no, none of them should be an option. If you look at our history, none of them should be an option. They have not led us forward, and if we keep going down this trajectory, we're going to be stillborn.
And it's interesting because when you talk about it, history was taken out of Nigerian schools. It's being reintroduced again. But then there are also the conversations around the context of the history and how that history is told. It's interesting, you are a Yoruba person telling a story that's really rooted in, particularly in a time in history that many people in Nigeria are still a bit sensitive about. And so there are two questions there. The lack of history in school, why do you think, or what do you think about that in terms of how we are not aware of our own history? Then the second part of that conversation is telling this history that's so sensitive. I've had a number of conversations on radio that regulator has called and said, you're towing the line. I have a former colleague a show was actually taken off of air that was talking about one of the massacres that happened during Nigeria's civil war. So you see a sensitivity, not just by the populace, but also those in power when it comes to this particular era and time.
So when I wrote the book, I was initially quite worried about getting into trouble or any of this, because we went into everything. We talked about the Jos massacres, we talked about when people were thrown in jail during Abacha's era, we talked about letter bombings, we talked about the Civil War. So it was a lot of really high sensitive topics. But then you release the book and you realize these guys, they don't care unless people are getting agitated, or people are paid, or people have an agenda to drive. And I felt, as a country, to move forward, we have to commiserate, we have to heal, we have to address the issues we've had. You talk to the older generation, and you realize there's a lot of subtle bias in the way they talk. Which
they have translated and transferred to the next generation.
Exactly, exactly. And it's because they never bothered to heal. Like, the Civil War was during our parents' teenage years. And a lot of them have never spoken about it, they've never talked about it. I heard about Biafra for the first time when I was 14, by mistake, because one of my dorm roommates had a Biafra note. And then he was just like, he was hiding it, playing around with it, and everyone was curious, what is that, what is that? And as a joke, he goes, oh, it's only for the Igbo boys to see. And then from there, it became, oh, we're starting our own room. And then there was a whole agitation, and none of us understood what was going on. So even the way they tried to address it, they just seized the note, told the boy to shut up, that was it, no more education.
And they kept the lid on that.
Kept the lid on that. So I get when I'm like, what's Biafra? And then even the way my parents were trying to explain it, you could see it was not a topic they were comfortable with. So I just felt we need literature that makes our history accessible. If you don't deal with the wounds of the past, the scars will not come out properly.
Very true. So you're relatively young, telling a story that starts in 1960, a story you were not there to see, and as you say by your own accounts, you were not really told of by your parents. So what challenges did you have in writing this story in this context? And then given again that it is fiction, but based on real life events. So there are going to be major happenings in the book that are the real happenings, and then you sort of draw the characters and a context and a story around that. So what are some of the challenges you experienced in trying to bring this to life?
So I call the book Faction because it's almost every scene actually happened, but then we just twisted it to fit the characters' lives. And what was interesting for me was the amount of research I had to do. I probably spent a year just researching. But what was good was there are many people who have experienced this who are still alive. So I just had many conversations with people of the older generation. And it was very interesting to see their viewpoints. And it's then you also start realizing we have a strong ethnic separation in the way we view history.
Okay, so let's talk about the character Emeka. There's Seun and Emeka, but Emeka in particular. Was there anything special you did in terms of sort of helping you to bring this to life? There have to be some cultural and maybe a bit of ethnic touches that will make him a bit more realistic as an Igbo man particularly, or is it putting together a number of people that you knew and taking some characteristics from them to create this individual?
So I guess a lot of the characters are a melange of people I actually know. So it's Dolapo and Emeka are the same generation. Then there's Seun and Aisha, who are the next generation. I had picked it that way I cheated. I wanted someone from every part of Nigeria. So Seun is technically from the South, but Dolapo adopts him and then makes him Seun. Then Dolapo is Yoruba, Aisha is from the North, and Emeka is from the East. My favorite interviewee during the process was this aunt of mine, and she was Igbo. So I guess that was why the telling voice, which was
easier for you.
Exactly. But of all the characters, my favorite was actually Aisha, and I had no clue what I was doing. It's a northern girl. I have no context for that. So it was fun playing around, doing research, talking to people, and trying to gauge if they believed the story these characters were telling.
All right, so the book has recently been translated into French, so you're getting into another language. What does this mean to you? What do you think you want to do in terms of also translating to other languages as well, and being part of a generation of young Nigerians who are seeking that knowledge for themselves and also helping others of their generation to find it?
Well, the hope is to educate as much or as many people as possible. And clearly, the more languages you get this into, the better you can do that. He actually did better in French as a release than it has done in English. And I was told this because my writing style is more like Victor Hugo, Alexander Dumas. There's very French writers. There's a lot of tragedy, lots of descriptive sentences. So it took off quite well in France. We're actually going to re-release it in English, because the version in French has a bit more material.
Okay.
And a more structured, right? So the way I wrote it initially, each chapter is titled after a fella song. And the idea I wanted was if you play the song, by the time you're done reading that chapter, the song should finish at the same time.
Yeah, there are a lot of long fella songs.
Exactly. And then I was also trying to make that work, I tried to control the way the reader writes, with how I use sentence structures.
Yeah.
So if you alliterate a lot, people tend to read quicker. People tend to read quicker. If you use a lot of punctuation marks, then they slow down. So I was trying to make it match the vibe of each song I was reading.
Okay.
So it was a very structurally focused book. I think I had too much time when I was writing it.
But it came out fantastic. You've created a fantastic piece of literature that's helping to spur conversations. Now, in terms of reactions about the book, what are some of the reactions you've gotten? What are some of the questions? Has anybody come and told you that, you know what, I've tried to talk, because I have some Igbo friends who tell me that their parents and their aunts and uncles will not talk about Biafra, will not talk about the war, will not talk about that time and the time after. And for them, many of them are having to learn it in this time and age from social media, from Google, as we said earlier. And then there are others like me who are Yoruba who, because the experience wasn't so much ours, we still don't have people who are talking about it. And this is a major chunk of Nigerian history, which is also responsible for a lot of the schisms and some of the tensions we see politically now and even as a people. So in terms of the reactions you've gotten for this book, what has it been like?
It's been interesting. It's been mixed. There have been a few people who are like, oh, I didn't realize, like, you don't realize all the crazy things that are happening. You talk to people who are not Nigerian and then they talk about Nigeria like it's a crazy place, and you're like, calm down, like it's chill. And then you actually sit down and go through our
history,
and you're like, wow,
it's not as chill.
It's a madhouse. So I had some positive feedback on people being like, okay, this is good to have everything just documented in a very accessible way. But I also had a friend who was like, who are you to tell the Igbo story, etc., etc. And I'm like, someone has to tell it. And if we keep separating it as the Igbo story, the Yoruba story, then we'll never have a Nigeria. We might as well just go back to where we were before. If we want to have a Nigerian story, then we need to make everyone's story the Nigerian story. We need to find a way to address it. We need to build monuments where people can come and commiserate and see and talk and understand. We need to put this in our curriculum. We need to put this in our history. Chimamanda had said once that she thinks one of the greatest things Americans did was to lie to their children, that everyone loved everyone, and Thanksgiving was a really fun time with the Indians.
Well, it was not.
Exactly. And then it's only when you're much older you realize the truth. I don't know if we need that in Nigeria, but if we keep walking down the path we're walking, we are not going to be united.
What was the most surprising thing you learned in the midst of the research? Let me take you to your process. Something that you hadn't heard about, or even if you had heard about it, you didn't know it in the context that getting into a deeper research and background for the story took you, or something that just plain out shocked you about Nigeria's history when you found out about it.
Probably the depth of atrocities of the Civil War. The fact it is literally just swept over. You don't realize how terrible it was. How many million people died
starving.
And it was interesting for me because I was a huge Owl fan. I am a huge Owl fan. And then you read about he was the one who recommended the blockade of the East.
And starvation as a tactic.
As a tactic. He was like, I would rather not fight my brothers. I would rather they just give up. And that has been very contentious for me because
this is someone you hold in high esteem, someone you believe in some of his methods, his subscription to education, and some of the methods he wanted to use in terms of governance. And then you see this.
This as a tactic, exactly. So let's just starve them out. So that was, it shook my, I guess, how I define my principles a little bit.
Okay, interesting. So it's been a good run with why Stillborn? Because Stillborn is very definitive. We know what it means medically. So why Stillborn?
So the idea was Nigeria was not ready to be born when it was born, and so it came out Stillborn. The prologue is essentially this almost mythical imagining that the main character has shown, in which he's talking to the founding fathers, and they're talking about how they had in the West, I always like I'd set up all these things. It was being copied across the country. We had the potential to be a great nation, and we just came out dead. And we haven't grown, we haven't really changed, nothing much has happened. It's the same people from pre-independence that are still ruling us. We've been stuck in time. So the whole idea was because we came out dead, that's why we're not moving forward. So I feel we need to re-examine what we want for Nigeria as a nation and how we want to, first ourselves, we need to have a
conversation.
Yeah, an internal conversation. What is Nigeria? What do we want it to be? And then we start projecting it to the outside world, as this is the united face of Nigeria that we've decided to take. I don't, we're only 60 years old as Nigeria.
Yeah.
So we're not that old. And if you look at the history of nations, we have not done that badly for such a young country.
Yeah.
The problem is, if you look at it in context of other global nations, then we seem like a very slow child. But the key word is child. Nigeria is still a child. And this is typical of most child nations. If we want to make the step forward to enter adolescence, to enter adulthood as a nation, then there are certain steps we have to take as a people collectively.
Okay.
And I think we're getting there slowly.
All right, slowly for some, possibly also painfully as well, because very important, there are wounds that have not scarified, that have not healed because we have not talked about them, we have refused them, we've kept them covered, and they've just been able to ferment. And when you have conversations, when literature like this comes out and allows us to have conversations, you sort of start the healing process. As slow and as small as it may be, it is a process that has started. All right, Koye, thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating.
Well, if you enjoyed watching this video, click here to get more of it, and don't forget to click here to subscribe.